Welcome, everybody, to Insight Meditation Community of Charlotte. Pardon me. My name is Thia. I'm glad to be up to you. I'm glad to be your leader for the evening tonight. First Wednesday night in September. Hasn't it been nice and cool? I love sleeping with the windows open. So recently we took a look at Majjhima Nikaya 36, and it had a very sort of behind the scenes feeling to it. It felt a little bit like a day in the life of the Buddha. And I really enjoyed that, and I heard that some of you enjoyed that too, and I thought it might be nice to follow that with other personal stories from the Buddha's life, because sometimes the Dharma can feel kind of dry. Don't get me wrong, it's been stupendously helpful and life-changing. And as many of you know, it's full of lists and precepts and stuff that's, I don't know, sometimes it's not as interesting. And so I've been curious about a more personal side of the Dharma and the Buddha's life. And as I was thinking about that, I remembered that I had this book by Wendy Garling called The Woman Who Raised the Buddha. And I've had it for quite some time, but I just began reading it not long ago. And I'm a person that reads 3 or 4 books at once. So, you know, the towering stack by the side of the bed. And so the other one I picked up was Stephen Batchelor, one of my favorite writers, Buddha, Socrates, and Us. And so these two give a lot of historical detail. Both of these writers I consider to be scholarly writers. And so the backs of these books are filled with citations that'll just take you down rabbit hole after rabbit hole, you know, things that you didn't know existed. It's really interesting stuff for Buddhist geeks, right? So there was a lot to read, and it's kind of all over the place. So I'll tell you tonight, this isn't a tidy Dharma talk, and I'll apologize in advance, but hopefully it'll be interesting. You'll get some more information about the life of the Buddha. And this is particularly from a feminine perspective, which I really like. Most of this is Wendy Garling looking at the women who raised the Buddha and what was that like from their perspective. It wasn't easy. I think I could probably stop right there. So this story tonight takes place in Nepal, a rural area of Nepal, and I almost brought maps and put them on and I thought, no, that's just too geeky. But near the border of India, okay, which is where the tribe was that the Buddha was a part of. And it's 2,600 years ago, and folks are not doing a lot of writing things down in this particular part of the world at this time. And so it's really hard to know which of these many accounts, bless you, is true. And those of you who are in the DSPP might hear some discrepancies from what we're studying. But we do know there was a lot of song, there was a lot of storytelling, there were prolific instruments and a lot of music and dancing, as well as a memorization system for important events. They would get a group of people and all agree this is what happened, and they would all commit it to memory, which is what the monastic community began to do when it came into being. So let's begin prior to the scene of Prince Siddhartha's birth. His mother's name was Maya Deva, And she was very pregnant. She had been carrying this child for 10 months almost. And she wanted to give birth in her favorite grove of trees. And so she's going there by carriage to Lumbini's Grove. And she's with her sister and a retinue of other women. They're going to help her deliver this baby. And she and her sister were both young noble women. They were both still teenagers at this time. And they were both, had been betrothed to the king of the Sakyan clan, the Buddha's dad, who was probably quite a bit older than they were. His name was King Suddhodana, and he proceeded to marry the older daughter, crown her queen, and invite the younger sister to be chief among his consorts and handmaiden to the queen. So Queen Mayadeva was the senior sister. She's now the wife and queen, and Prajapati was the younger sister. And all of that is about to change just like that. So Mayadeva is about 19. She gives birth to a boy child and names him Siddhartha, meaning he who has found meaning, or he who has attained his goal. As per custom, the child was taken to see the prophets of the time who predicted that he would be a great world ruler. They also prophesied if the child left home, his destiny was to become a wheel-turning spiritual leader. That's interesting because, the Dharma is the wheel, the chakra is the wheel, and that definitely was his destiny. So the father, the king, wanted to make sure that the boy became the ruler of their clan, and he endeavored to isolate him in the palace compound, providing for his every need and scheduling tutors to train him in every way, including meditation. His mother had died shortly after giving birth, about 7 days later, and had chosen her sister to raise the boy Siddhartha. A council had confirmed the choice, and that moved Prajapati into the first wife position. So she's now the queen and the mother to Siddhartha. So imagine you're 19 or 20, you're Prajapati, and you're with your sister Maya as she gives birth to her first and only child. Then you're asked to take the newborn and raise it as your own. Then, a week later, you witness your sister's death. Approximately another week later, you're going with the newborn and the king to the soothsayers who predict this incredible greatness for the child. And if that's not enough drama, she's then tapped to marry the king and is crowned as the queen of the whole Sakya clan, which is her family and his family and a whole lot of people. And all this happened to this young woman in about a month's time. So that was a lot. Plus the new queen Maha, which means great, Prajapati, already had at least one small child. And fortunately, now she has literally hundreds of helpers at her beck and call. And fortunately for those helpers, she's reputed to be wise, kind, and generous, which is how she earns the title Maha, or Great Queen. So while the Buddha is growing up, his father is making every effort to keep him isolated in this large compound. And at around the age of 16, he is married to Yasodhara, his first cousin, which is quite common at that time. As a matter of fact, his parents were also first cousins. So Yasodhara is also 16 years old, a great beauty from a noble family. But the Buddha, well, he's not the Buddha yet. Siddhartha has already begun to explore outside the compound on horseback with his charioteer, who is sworn to secrecy. His growing curiosity about other ways of life doesn't go unnoticed by his parents and his wife. But after a few years, Siddhartha and Yasodhara have a son, Rahula, so named because of the eclipse of the moon on the night of his birth. Soon after the son is born, Siddhartha can't contain his urge to explore further beyond the palace walls. What he's discovered there has already begun to alter his course and will eventually lead to the birth of Buddhism. On his trips outside the palace walls, he's realized that pleasure is not only short-lived, but that life contains much suffering. The sights he is struck by are an old man, a very sick person, and he sees a corpse in decay. And the sheltered prince abruptly realizes that he is not immune to these truths of old age, illness, and death, that no one is. A fourth encounter outside of the palace with an ascetic, probably a holy man or a reclusive yogi, also strikes a chord with him, suggesting that perhaps there's a way to meet and even understand this seemingly inescapable suffering of life. So, his parents can kind of see what's coming, and they beg him not to leave. With abiding sadness, speaking for Prajapati as well as for himself, the king says to his son, "Pray, do not leave my lotus-eyed, charmingly beautiful boy. Great grief would I suffer if I were bereft of you. Your mother, as well as I, would go to an unwelcome death. What sort of special bliss is this, that for its sake you would leave me, your people, and your kingdom? Live the way your father has lived, my son. Be content. As long as I live, or as long as she, your mother, will live. For seeing you go away, surely we will die." So they're literally begging him. They can't understand why he'd want to leave. Nobody does. But soon afterwards, he leaves. His charioteer goes with him to a certain point, and then he sends the charioteer back and says, "Okay, this is where we part ways." The charioteer is not happy with him. He's visibly shaken and chides him for taking for granted all that he's been given, walking away from an inheritance and breaking the hearts of his parents, of course his wife, and leaving an infant son without a father. So back at the palace, it's not long before everyone knows he's gone. Everything goes into mayhem. Everyone is distraught, and the queen begs the king to send a posse to retrieve the young prince and bring him back. And the posse, I thought this was an interesting choice, is of ministers that get sent to retrieve him. That's dispatched, and they find him within a day's time, but they can't convince him to return. He says he must take leave, and he won't return until he's discovered for himself the answers that he's seeking in regard to suffering and the end of suffering. So upon this news, Queen Gotami descends into darkness, depression, and constant weeping. She reportedly goes blind. The whole palace is thrown into turmoil and pain, especially his wife, Yasodhara, who is not only hurt, but understandably angry. About 6 years go by, and as promised, Siddhartha, who is now the Buddha, or Tathagata, as he refers to himself, returns to his homeland to see his family. He is now the wheel-turning spiritual master and has fulfilled the predictions of the prophets at his birth. He goes to see his family, who receive him with joy and wonder. They've forgiven him because they've heard the news of how he has been traveling the land with these great teachings that are taking people into new levels of understanding. And so his father makes arrangements for him to teach the next day. But there's a problem. At this time, the law of the land made a difference between men and women. The king, the ministers, and the men listened to the law. The Dharma preached every day and were enlightened by the law, and many of them were rescued from suffering. The women felt grudge and resentment, saying, although the Buddha and the community come back to his native country, only the men have the good fortune to see him and hear his message. We women alone are not favored by the Buddha. So the men are coming home to their wives and saying, it's wonderful, such good fortune for us. The women are saying, not good fortune for me. So the women gang up and go to the queen and say, we deserve to hear this too. Why are we being left out? And the law is that they can't convene while the men are there, the women can't come. So the women suggest that the Buddha teach the men in the morning and the women in the afternoon, and the king agrees to that. So he's teaching hundreds of people a day at this point, and they seem to be getting it, which is kind of amazing. After some time, the Buddha states that he needs to go on his way. He's quote unquote on tour. That's what the book used. He's making the rounds of the regions. He's very well known at this point. He leaves, and in his wake, large communities, kind of like Kalyana Mitra groups, are established to discuss and debate his teachings, which is now known as the Dharma, the truth, or the way. He's gone another 5 years and has begun the order of Buddhist monks who now shave their heads, don yellow or orange robes, and take a vow of poverty with a begging bowl as their only possession. So about this time, he returns home again to settle a dispute between the two clans, his mother's tribe and his father's tribe, about water rights from the river that runs in that area. He settles this dispute, and his father, who is now quite old, dies. After the king's death, the Buddha goes back to the forest teaching, and his mother finds him and approaches him. She asks to be ordained as the first female Buddhist monk. She says she's been living as a monastic at the palace for some years now. He simply tells her no. She asks twice more, and he denies her twice more, breaking that ask 3 times rule that was in place. Usually, if you ask him 3 times, he had to tell you what you needed to know. She leaves. She shaves her hair off, she dons robes, and she returns with scores of other women from the palace who have also shaved their heads, donned robes. She's found weeping at the Buddha's camp by Ananda. Her feet are bloody, and they're all covered in dust. She's used to riding in carriages, not walking, but she wants to demonstrate her willingness to be a part of this monastic group. Ananda is shocked to see her so bedraggled. When Ananda sees them with bleeding feet covered with dust and half dead, his breast was full of sorrow, his eyes filled with tears, and he said, "Why have you come? For what reason have you endured these hardships? Have the Sakyas been driven from their city by the enemy? Why does the mother of the Buddha remain in such a place?" She explains that she wants to ordain and that the Buddha will not let her. And so he says he'll approach the Buddha on her behalf, which she thinks is a great idea. He does that, and the Buddha says no, twice more. Finally, Ananda says to the Buddha, "Perhaps I can say this to you in a different way. Master, do you think that a woman can achieve liberation through the teachings that you have given?" And at this time, the master says, "Absolutely," knowing that gender is merely a convention of their times. Something shifts. And so the Buddha agrees that the women can join the monastic order, and he draws up some extremely difficult rules specifically for the woman renunciates, called the 8 guru dharmas, or the harsh rules for the female monastics. Guru means heavy, so heavy rules. They readily agree to these rules, and some of these rules are still in place today. We'll have to ask Ayya Sudama about that when she comes in a couple weeks. So the story ends with the first female monk in history being ordained, and it is the Buddha's mother, and her name is Maha Prajapati Gautami. And at this point, the fourfold assembly that the Buddha predicted that would come about has now begun. He has male and female monastics and male and female lay practitioners in place. And he compares this to a great white elephant striding on 4 sturdy legs through the forest. In closing, I'd like to point out that Buddhist monastic women today still struggle to claim equal status, and that these heavy rules are still subject to intense scholarly scrutiny by notable scholars like Bhikkhu Analayo, who is still a voice for ordaining women without the extremely heavy yoke they must bear. There's much to say about this, but we'll close here for the evening. So I offer this for your consideration, just another peek into the times of the Buddha. Imagine if women were never okayed to study the Dharma, to be together with men, it could have been otherwise, right? So let's just pause for 1 minute and let that land. Maybe close your eyes.